So a few days ago, I finally completed Hogwarts Legacy, and I would like to take a few moments to talk about the game here. Honestly, this game is very, very, very good, and I'm sure you guys heard a lot by now. All the people praising the game, giving it, all this great attention, and just sort of celebrating what the game has done very, very well. Honestly, though, for me, I feel this game is very, very good and definitely deserving of a lot of the praise that it's been getting. However, that being said, it could have been better. I feel that it does miss the mark during some moments of fully realizing what an RPG like video game could really do with the Harry Potter franchise. And for a first attempt at a developer, I will say this game is incredibly impressive. It really does surprise you, and there's a lot here that I was really not expecting that is in the game. But there are some systems that I feel this is a great foundation of where they can build the game from and really create a much better sequel. So in this video, I want to talk about everything I like and all the stuff I wasn't a fan of and think that needs to be improved and what I would like to see in a possible Hogwarts Legacy 2, okay? So before I get started here, I would actually like to say that if you're wondering where this game takes place during the timeline of Harry Potter, it's hundreds of years before the events of the film. So there are no references in here. There's nothing here that would sort of hint to the events that would take place in the movies because it hasn't happened yet. You are hundreds of years before the events of the Harry Potter films and even way before the events of the Fantastic Beasts films. And so this is a great game where you can kind of just jump into, and even if you have no knowledge of Harry Potter, let's say you never saw any of the films, you never saw any of the Fantastic Beasts movies, if you never ever exposed yourself to Harry Potter, you can jump into this game and feel very comfortably with the world and everything that's kind of happening. It kind of layers out things as it's going on. It explains things in a kind of methodical manner. And so it doesn't basically waste any time assuming that you're going to know what the world is like, and you can kind of just go in not knowing anything and have a really, really good experience, which is great, I feel. Because it captures all of the magic of what you saw in the Harry Potter films, and it just further explores the world and really goes in depth with sort of lore and all the stuff surrounding it. It did a fantastic job just bringing to life all the stuff that wasn't really explored much in the movies and kind of talked about. You really get to see it in spades here. So I would like to say that first off because, that is sort of a burning question. In fact, when I was playing the game, I was like, there's no references to any of the Harry Potter stuff, and then I finally looked into it and I was like, oh yeah, it's hundreds of years before the events of the film. So again, if you haven't exposed yourself to that, you don't need to because you can just jump into this game not having any knowledge and feel right at home. I think that what this game does very well and arguably better than anything else that the game has to offer is its world. It does an incredible job just bringing to life all these missing components that, they just weren't explored that much in the films due to time constraints. You really got to see everything connected so well in this game, and especially all the stuff that was kind of talked about in the books but never really explored through a visual presentation. This game kind of brings to life all of that. Me personally, I've only seen the movies. I haven't read any of the books itself, so I was able to kind of go in here, and there are many areas when I was playing this game. It was very exciting because there were many rooms as I was kind of exploring Hogwarts Castle where it kind of came back to me in flashes. I was like, oh my god, yes, I remember this room from the movie. I remember it during this scene. And as you're exploring this castle, it can be very, very exciting, very intriguing as you're kind of going to all these rooms and you're trying to find out where everything is placed in relation to where the actual films took place on and how the world was actually explored and built upon further. They did an incredible job, honestly, with just connecting all these details, and everything is so well realized. The graphics are outstanding. This quite possibly might be one of the most detailed open world video games I have ever played. Even when you go to the hidden staircase and there's just, a room like a spire where you're just rounding up this staircase, all of the pictures that are on the wall have FMV videos that kind of play and loop around. So you actually get moving paintings and stuff just like you saw in the actual films. And all the lighting, the statues, and everything just comes to life. Everything's moving in the game. You're just like walking through this castle, and all of this stuff is animated. You can interact with it. There's tons of students and kids kind of walking around, and everyone's gathered in like the common rooms and stuff like that. Honestly, for a first effort of a developer bringing this world to life in this respect, it's just an incredible piece of art, piece of work. It honestly is quite impressive, and your jaw will drop multiple times as you're exploring the Hogwarts castle and all the detail and everything that's happening around you as it's unfolding. It is so well done. I think that's where you're seeing a lot of people really kind of lose their minds, because it's just so interesting. Anywhere that you look, there is something interesting happening. There is some type of animation. Something's going on. And you can just kind of stop and look around. There's kids kind of walking and running to their class. There's books flying around like birds. Again, statues are animated. There's ghosts around. There's pictures moving. It's just countless amount of things are happening before your eyes, and honestly, it does wonders to really bring this world to life in ways that very few video games honestly have achieved. There are some impressive systems that we saw with some of these open worlds, but most of them, take place in rather kind of bland landscapes, large sprawling worlds where it's like, all right, yeah, you see these gorgeous vistas before you, right? But most of what's happening is pretty static. You're placed in like a field or something, and there's, swaying grass, or there's wind, or there's rain, there's something like that to just kind of bring the world to life with atmosphere. This game is just, it has all of that and then so much more. So although the atmosphere of the world is incredible, what really helps bring it to life is also the visual quality of what this game offers you. Now, for the moment, this game is a current gen only exclusive. It is not available on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. You have to have one of the newer gen systems or a high-powered PC to play it. However, this game is actually slated for release on last gen systems. And I'm honestly quite curious how exactly they're going to be able to pull it off, because this game really does look incredible. And when you look at all the systems in place, the physics interactions, the different events going on, and just how it's pushing the current gen hardware, you can degrade graphics to a certain quality, but there's a lot of systems in here that I'm just kind of questioning how exactly this game is going to look and run on a last generation system. This is a next generation experience through and through, and it really proves that to you as you're exploring through the world. It's just, again, your mind is captured towards some detail. Something's animating, something's going on around you. It immediately captures your attention. So, what is the visual quality like on console? I played this on PlayStation 5. I have to say that I played the majority of my time in the ray traced fidelity mode. So what this gives you is a near 4K resolution with ray traced reflections and ray traced shadows on PS5. The ray tracing in this game dramatically changes up the look of Hogwarts specifically. It's not so noticeable outdoors, I will say. But when you're actually within the castle, there are reflections that are missing entirely without ray tracing that have just been added in with the ray tracing effects. There's a lot of marble, there's a lot of stone, there's a lot of shiny surfaces in this game. Even the wood vinyl gets really nice reflections. The suit of armors and all the metal, statues, all that stuff gets actual real-time reflections, and you can see your character within them. This game looks dramatically different with the ray tracing effects on, and I played the majority of the game this way, which was at 30 frames per second. However, I have to say that this was a very, very consistent 30 FPS. During combat, I noticed no dips whatsoever. I only noticed the dips while exploring a very particular segment of Hogwarts Castle. In fact, I was coming down a staircase, and it was always happening at this one particular staircase when I was coming down during this one particular area. The frame rate would stutter for like 2 seconds. It would drop down to like the mid-20s, and then it would shoot back up as I turned around and went down another staircase. So basically, it was like during this one specific segment in the castle, which I only visited about a couple times, so I only noticed it a couple of times. The frame rate dips, and it goes back up, and it's perfectly smooth for the rest of the experience. I didn't notice any dips during combat. I didn't notice any dips during traversal, exploration. The rest of the Hogwarts castle, just, excusing that one particular area, was perfectly smooth. And I looked at the difference because I switched off between playing this game in its balanced mode, which is a 40 FPS mode with, basically high quality graphics without ray tracing, I might add. So I switched off between these different modes, and it is incredible actually how dramatic Hogwarts looks differently compared to the ray tracing on versus off. So if you're fine with 30 FPS, this is the mode that I actually played the game on, and I felt it was very, very attractive and well worth the dip in sort of, the frame rate and whatnot. However, I will say this, I'm fine with 30 FPS. I played games at 30 FPS for many years. I go back and I play older games on, these previous gen consoles. So 30 FPS doesn't bother me. For me, though, controller latency is very, very important because it goes a long way in making 30 FPS feel sluggish versus really responsive. This is a game where I was actually surprised they got the latency down at 30 FPS to the point where it feels very, very responsive. In fact, I would say this is one of the more responsive games that I played at that particular frame rate. So you're not going to notice much in terms of really bad latency, even all the timed blocks, because during combat there's like timed dodges you have to do. There's also special parries and blocks that you can do if you time it correctly. I didn't have much trouble at all doing any of the combat sections. I even did all the challenges for the combat as well. I didn't have any issues whatsoever playing this game at 30 FPS, with the latency of the controls. I felt that it was very, very responsive. Everything happened as I was pushing the buttons, and it was perfectly fine for me. It was a very enjoyable experience at that frame rate, and I got the enhanced graphical quality, and again, with the ray traced reflections and shadows, it looks dramatically different. I will say, though, about the ray tracing, it doesn't have much of a draw distance, so you might notice some things like the shadows will transition to their normal shadow maps on PS5 from a distance, and as you walk up to them, it'll transition to the ray trace shadows, right? As it's kind of like, I guess the distance at which the rays are casted is not really that long, and even the reflections as well. You might, walk up to glass, and at a certain moment during your transition up to the glass, it'll actually pop into view your character on the glass. It wasn't that noticeable for me, only during certain sections where it was kind of really allowed to shine. And honestly, just the visual quality of what I was seeing in Hogwarts alone made it well worth it, despite the actual reduction in the quality level there and the resolution, I guess, of the ray tracing. Despite all of that, this is a very, very attractive game, regardless of the graphical mode you actually choose and decide to play the game with. I was very, very happy with the way the controls felt, as well as the way the game looked during its fidelity ray trace performance mode, and the performance was fantastic too. Smooth 30 FPS, barring in mind that one particular section of the castle, which again I only visited a couple of times, so it wasn't a big deal. It was perfectly smooth with no dips, no visible dips, I should say, whatsoever. The music of the game is also very, very good. It perfectly captures the movies and Harry Potter. It actually adds a little bit of more personality to what I was kind of expecting with this game. In fact, some of the music at some points reminded me of Fallout 4, strangely enough. But there's a lot of really great music, and the soundtrack is really allowed to shine here. I do have to say, as a slight criticism, I do feel the audio mixing, there is a bit of an issue here. For some reason, my character felt like he was talking through like a voice box. He felt a little bit tinty. And when you're creating your character, you can actually pitch the voice. It's like a voice changer. You can actually change it to a higher pitched voice or a lower pitched voice, depending on what you're looking for there. And I just felt that, even during the default option, the character voice felt like he was talking through like, some type of device. It felt tinty for some reason. That's really the only way I can describe it. So I really felt the audio mixing was kind of off at times. The music was also sometimes just glaringly loud, right? It was like super loud to the point where it completely overpowered any of the sound effects that were going on in the game. And it actually took me a lot of time to actually constantly go into the settings. I had to change up my audio mix settings. It took me many hours of playing to get it just the way I felt was appropriate for the game, because I do feel like on its base default difficulty, base default modes for the audio, it just, the music's too loud, the effects are kind of, low, the dialogue is also super loud and sounds tinty. So I do feel the mixing of the audio could have been a little bit better. But if I'm just talking about the music and stuff, it again perfectly captures the soul, I guess, of the Harry Potter films. It does add a little bit more of a personality in there, so there is that to contend with. Now, the last thing I want to touch upon is the gameplay of the game. Now, I feel that they did a really good job of simplifying the controls, but giving you options in terms of how you approach combat. So, for one, there's actually full-on stealth in this game. You can actually turn invisible via one of the spells that you use, and you can kind of crouch around, and if you get behind enemies, you can use whatever spell it is to basically petrify them, or put them in kind of a lock state, and they fall to the floor, and then they're fine. So there's actually a decent stealth system in here. You can't do things like, whistle people over. There's no cover system at all. So, it's a little bit rudimentary, but for the most part, the stealth works fine. You can enter an area, turn invisible, walk around behind enemies. There are different power-ups and upgrades that you can use to spend your points on, and experience levels where you can kind of, take down multiple enemies at one point. So I feel the stealth is very, very good. Now, when you get into combat, for the most part, this is a very simplistic. You're using your, simple one button to cast spells and attack, but you also have a combination, basically, of different spells you can cast. So you can actually map certain spells to basically any of the face buttons on the controller. So if you hold down the attack button and push square, triangle, X, or circle, any one of those, depending on the spells that you have kind of mapped to those areas, you could levitate people, you can pull them towards you, you can push them away, you could just completely torture enemies, to your whim. If you're using like kind of dark magic spells in this game, there are a few kind of, forbidden spells that you can kind of learn throughout the game's many side quests that kind of, add to the flair and the style of combat. So there are some options here when you get to the combat. And in addition to you casting these spells, enemies will also be attacking you. So you have your single parryable attacks that come from enemies. So if you push triangle at the right time, it will do like a shield. And if you do it at the perfect time, it will not only deflect the attack, but he'll send an attack right back at them. So, you can basically parry different enemies, and the combat has like a rhythm that you kind of get down with. I feel that this is a very good combat system. It really only got repetitive when you face later enemies in the game. They get very kind of spongy. They take a lot of damage. It can sometimes take 10 to 15 minutes to take down some of these larger enemies. And it's just kind of really, really repetitive at that sort of point. So when that's not happening and you're just kind of facing normal enemies, it can get pretty exciting. And there were a couple of times when I was playing through the game where I was actually really getting into the combat, and I was really having a good time casting those spells, doing those certain combinations. There's whole like juggles you can do. You can basically attack an enemy and juggle them so many times in the middle of the air that they just have no chance against you. They're basically doing flips. They constantly falling through the air. They can't get up on their feet. So it kind of makes you feel kind of powerful. And later on through the game, you get a lot more spells. There's a lot more of variety when it comes to the combat that you're actually playing with. It's just that when you're facing some of those larger enemies, the combat can kind of feel really repetitive when you're just constantly attacking this guy, and the health bar is just, kind of going down bit by bit by bit. So excusing those segments, I feel that the combat is very, very good here. It's just only in those particular moments where the shortfalls of sort of the repetitiveness really come to light. So I can simply stop there, and I think most of you would agree when I say that this sounds like a very, very, very good game. All the components that make up a great game are there. It has an interesting world that really kind of draws you in, that's fascinating, and that you want to basically spend time in. It's got really fun gameplay. It's got really cool music. It's got really beautiful graphics. What about the storytelling? Is that sort of up to par? Now, this is one element that I was kind of very worried about, because during the later movies, what really makes those movies really interesting and even a great watch after all these years is it really makes use of darker themes and really tells more mature stories. It deals with death, really just horrible stuff and torture, and it's like, wow, you're watching this unfold, and it's no longer a children's story kind of anymore, like the first couple movies were, excuse me. It's now turned into this kind of really dark fantasy narrative, and honestly, I was really hoping that this game was going to inherit more of those themes rather than the kind of earlier Harry Potter films were kind of, more childish in a way, less mature than what you kind of saw in the later films. So how does this game fare in comparison? I feel like the story of Hogwarts Legacy is fine, it's passable, it's definitely not the highlight, I would say, of this game experience. But there is intrigue in there is this ongoing mystery, and you're trying to piece together basically what the main villain of the game is after, why it's so important, and it does deal with some dark-ish themes, but it just never really feels like on the scale and on the spectrum of what you were really hoping for with the later Harry Potter films and saw with the later Harry Potter films. It doesn't really reach those heights. So while I think the story is entertaining for the moment, the cutscenes are well directed, all the actors did a fantastic job bringing these characters to life. Again, there is mystery, there is intrigue, there are some dark themes, but the game doesn't really shy away from going too dark. You're not going to see, really, dark stuff happening like in the Deathly Hallows films or even the couple films before that. You're not going to see anything that's sort of on that level here. Most of what's happening is sort of you piecing together stuff that happened in the past, you kind of, catching up with the enemies, and, they're trying to cause havoc on the world, they're trying to take over. There's like this war that the main villain is trying to start again. So it feels fairly, I don't want to say generic, but, it's not as exciting, I would say. It's definitely the weakest portion of this game, I feel like, where it just felt like I really would have wished that they went for a more mature storytelling palette. But the thing is, you have to understand that they definitely wanted this game to be accessible for all audiences. This is a rated T game. We weren't going to see anything like an M rating here. They want, of course, everyone to be able to play this game, and it to be for all ages, not just adults, but, the younger audience as well. So, I don't fault them for basically wanting to create something that's not so dark. And there are some kind of dark moments in this game. It's just that they're kind of few and far between. Honestly, I was actually more invested in some of the side content than I was in the main story, to be completely honest with you. Some of the side stories are very, very dark and do deal with some, really mature themes. And it's there, I think, where you feel the game kind of mostly excels in, is the side content storytelling departments. Because then again, the main story's fine, it's passable, it's enjoyable for what it is, but I just don't think it's particularly as memorable as exploring Hogwarts Castle, some of the boss fights in the game, the graphics, or some of the music. It's definitely, I think, the weakest elements of what the game has to offer, but as it stands, it's still a very, very good game. And is still a very entertaining story that it tells. It's just, it doesn't feel as well put together as the rest of the package, I should say. That being said, it is a complete story, so I really liked in this game how your main character, even though you create a character, you create a kid, going through Hogwarts and stuff, you create him from scratch, you get to choose your gender, you get to choose your voice, you get to do all of that. What I really liked in this game is they actually gave him or her a personality. Yeah, your character actually engages in conversation, he talks with people, he's present in the cutscenes. What you're wearing as well is fully present in all of the cutscenes. It made the game feel like your character wasn't just someone that you created through a character editor, but was actually a main character in a story that had a, kind of a background and that was developed. I really liked how they handled your main character in this game. They do that bullshit where it's like he's the chosen one, they do that kind of cliche story trump, but they don't. They do a really good job at making sure that the character is well developed, has a personality, and that he's not just sitting there like a robot. People are talking to him or telling him what to do, and he has no involvement whatsoever what's going on, or no opinions. He actually does have a say, he does have a personality, and you get to decide that as you're actually playing through the game. So I think that kind of covers all the key elements of Hogwarts Legacy and everything that has to offer. That being said, I did mention earlier in this video that there were some things that I actually didn't care for in this game, or just felt that they could have done better. I feel that this is a very, very good game, but it's not great, and there are some issues here that I think are keeping it from becoming a really great game, or reaching that level of status of what I was kind of really hoping for with a full-fledged Harry Potter RPG experience. For one, this game is advertised as an RPG, but honestly, it is a RPG light video game. What I mean by that is it has the basic components to make up what an RPG really is. It has the dialogue options, it has the leveling, it has your choice of different skill trees and abilities and all that stuff. But this game doesn't really have much in the way of consequences for your actions. So you can engage in conversations with people, and usually there's a couple of different dialogue options that you have to choose from. You can be nice, you can be rude. Doesn't matter, actually. So you can be a complete dick throughout the game, and it actually doesn't change the outcome of most of what's happening. So there are no consequences to your actions. It's not like if you lie to someone, they come back and they get you, and it's like some big, thing that kind of ripples through the rest of the game experience. It's just like, oh, well, you're being rude to me, and then they just go off and they do whatever they normally do, But it doesn't change the outcome of what's actually happening in the missions themselves. Case in point, there was one mission where I had to rescue an animal. And at the end of the mission, where you finally get the animal and you're supposed to bring it back to its owner, you have the choice. Oh, I can hand this animal over to you and, accept the end of the mission there, or I can keep the animal for myself and take care of it for myself, or you can ask for more money. It does not matter what you do with that animal. If you decide to hand it over, mission complete. If you decide to keep it, mission complete. It doesn't change anything besides the actual dialogue options. Of course, the person that requested that you save the animal is kind of, rude to you and feels like you screwed her over. But she doesn't do anything afterwards. It's not like, oh, she comes back to you and she tries to attack you, or she starts sending, mercenaries at you, and it's like, oh, you took my pet from me. How dare you? I'm going to start, going after you. I'm going to make you pay. It's nothing like that. And most of, even the spells that you use, you have the option to use dark magic in this game, forbidden spells, which is like a big no-no they teach you throughout the Hogwarts school. There's no consequences if you learn or don't learn them whatsoever. It's basically only your ability to use them in combat. So, if you want to curse enemies during, different spells or use dark magic, it just adds more combat options to your already available list of spells. But there are no consequences. It's not like if you use them, you're viewed as like a dark wizard and an enemy, and no one trusts you anymore. They have like Dementors come and chase you down and some shit. It's nothing like that where you're basically under arrest or there's any consequences for using any spells whatsoever. And it's this where I feel the game is it just misses the mark a little bit, because I would have loved the option to either be a light or a dark wizard. You can choose between, right? Choose between if you want to be a good guy or a bad guy. It unlocks different, side missions and different, missions and stuff that you would go on versus the other one. You would have different consequences based off your actions. Maybe combat would be easier with the dark wizard spells, but, you would have people coming after you and trying to band together and stop you, versus the other side where you get like a different set of skills and abilities. Something there that would just basically allow for a different level of variability with the game. So it's kind of light on those mechanics. There's not really a lot of consequences for the type of person that you want to be in this game. Again, it just changes up some light dialogue options. Yes, you can, you can do some things like ask for more money, when you're doing missions or turning missions in, but, basically there's no incentive for you to be rude whatsoever. So what this actually leads to is just you simply telling everyone what they want to hear, just being nice and constantly agreeing with them no matter what they say, and it doesn't change anything throughout the experience. It's really only, do you want to be a dick for no reason, or do you want to just be nice and get it over with? So there are no consequences to the actual outcomes of your decisions for the most part. There are a couple of side missions that do kind of branch off, and some have different endings, but it's honestly not so dramatic, and for the most part you're just going to be sitting there, again, like I said, telling people what they want to hear at all times and constantly agreeing with them. So in that respect, I feel like the game just missed the mark a bit, because if they just leaned in a little bit more heavily on the RPG mechanics and really tried to give you your path, and let you carve out exactly who you want to be within this story, different endings and stuff. I don't even know if the ending of the game changes. From what I understand, I think the ending of the game stays the same, or you're always going to be facing off against that last boss. I don't even think that changes. So you're honestly kind of going through this game, and for the most part, the story feels linear. And some of the side options you do have, different paths you can take, but for the most part, you're just kind of, going through this experience, just kind of playing it as is. So I really feel like there could have been more work done to really further expand on the RPG elements of this game. However, as I mentioned before, this is what really excites me about a potential sequel with Hogwarts Legacy, is that they have an incredible framework, an incredible foundation of what they built here. A sequel, a potential Hogwarts Legacy 2, that does encompass and embrace more of its RPG mechanics, darker storytelling, I feel could really just hit the nail on the head there and just knock it out of the park. I feel like that could be a really exciting piece of entertainment, and to really further expand upon that and really kind of bring in and cement sort of the excellence of what this game has done, and all the stuff that it's accomplished with this first entry, to really just bring it home with a dark story, gameplay options, and just service all these different gameplay styles would be really, really, really cool. Even the level design, I would say, isn't even as, it kind of leads you on a path. There are sometimes moments where you can break off and collect certain items, but for the most part, it's not like, oh, you have higher stealth, so it unlocks the ability for you to traverse into areas that you normally wouldn't be able to go to before. It's nothing like that. For the most part, the game is just kind of, if you have the means to get through an area, regardless of who you are or what you've upgraded, you can just go there. So those are sort of my main criticisms surrounding the game. I do feel that it should have lent in a little bit more heavily on the RPG mechanics. I wish it would have just been a little bit darker with the storytelling and just giving you more options to kind of be who you want to be within this world. And it could have really just been a incredible masterpiece of an experience, in my opinion. However, as it stands, as I mentioned before, this is an incredible first attempt, incredible first entry into an RPG Harry Potter video game, and this excites me so much for where the series could go next. And I really hope that, again, they just really focus on some of those core areas that I mentioned previously. This could really just be an amazing experience, and it really is fantastic as it is right now. Just missing that little bit to really just put this game in all-time legendary status. It's just missing that little bit of extra oomph. So those are my thoughts on Hogwarts Legacy. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys played the game, which I'm sure many of you have, at this point, I think it was just announced that this game has sold more than the last 6 Call of Duty games. Put that into perspective. We always hear about Call of Duty being the top-selling, franchise and all that stuff. This game has sold more than the last 6 games, individual sales, not combined, but they've outpaced the last 6 Call of Duties in terms of sales. So it's almost like a no-brainer that we're going to be having a sequel at some point, I would feel. It'd be almost ludicrous for us not to expect that. But I really hope that they just build upon it further and expand upon it further with all those elements that I mentioned before. That would just make it, again, such an incredible masterpiece, in my opinion, because the framework here is astounding. So those are my thoughts on Hogwarts Legacy. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you all think, and I will talk with you all next time. Thank you very much.